give you an idea, hold on. I just got a message that is being recorded. To give you an idea, since 2021, the US government alone has provided $500 million in assistance to the Palestinian Authority. This includes over $417 million that went through UNRWA to schools. 50% of the schools in Gaza are ran by UNRWA, which is a UN, the best known UN agency, right? Now, let that linger. How many of the terrorists, the 3,000 terrorists that stormed Israeli territory, graduated from one of these schools and were taught insightful material? Because we have proof that in their books, instead of teaching math, the way that or physics, the way they teach my kids or that they teach your kids, they would say, under which angle do you need to throw a stone at a settler in order to hit him? This is a math class. We have evidence that a couple of years ago, a Palestinian NGO, non-governmental organization who enjoyed funding from European governments, sponsored activities of, amongst others, a kindergarten in Gaza. What happened there, they, just like in any other kindergarten, they had a end of the year theater piece that the kids were played at. And the theater piece was actually a mock attempt of hijacking Israeli soldiers and bringing them into Gaza. This is 3 years ago. This is 5 years old kids finishing kindergarten just before they start elementary school. Now that is what we see in Gaza and in Palestinian West Bank, as they call it, in East Jerusalem. But many of these organizations actually, instead of promoting human rights in Gaza, fighting for the rights of Palestinian women or Palestinian children, or making sure that that Palestinian civilians have access to health services and so on, they take your money and they go around the world and they lobby and promote lawfare, which is legal political demonization of Israel, against Israel, at the parliaments around the world. Al-Haq, the biggest Palestinian human rights organization and the best known, they submitted this year alone over 20 submissions to the United Nations, claiming that Israel, and making a legal case that Israel, under the international law, which is obviously a lie, right, promotes systematic racist policies against indigenous Palestinian people, right? Including accusing Israelis for establishing a water company, because they say water is an indigenous natural resource of the indigenous Palestinian people. Thus, Israelis supplying water to Israel and to the Palestinian Authority are stealing the Palestinian national resource. I mean, this is how insane it can be. In their reports, they'll claim, they'll make a report against the Caterpillar, the international, company, accusing them that they're supporting occupation when they sell their bulldozers to the Israeli government or Israeli companies for doing construction work. So much so that they will make a legal case and issue a report on this, saying that these bulldozers are used to forcefully displace indigenous Bedouin population in the Negev. Now, Negev is it's not disputed territory. This is South Israel, right? This is the desert in the south part of Israel. This is how insane it becomes. It goes beyond that. Palestinian Center for Human Rights, another major Palestinian so-called human rights organization, they, after the previous round of rockets, right, in May and June, they issued a statement saying that Palestinian resistance in all its forms is not only not a violation of international law, but a right of the Palestinian people. Now, what does that mean? Palestinian resistance in all its forms means resorting to violence, right? This is a clear call to violence against Israelis and Jews. Now, I say Israelis because the victims of October the 7th have been all citizens of Israel, but including the 2 million Arabs, including some of them who were also among the hostages and the kidnapped and so on. But that is only to show how far-reaching the contemporary anti-Semitism actually is. You don't have to be a Jew to be victim of this, because as long as you not only stand on the sidelines, as long as you don't join the lines of those who are against Jews, from their perspective, you're part of the problem, thus a legitimate target. There was we saw over the years a gradual process of dehumanization of Israelis, because when instead of calling them Israelis or Jews, if you call them settlers, if you call them Zionists, over the years, you are actually you are dehumanizing them. So when the moment comes, it is much easier to rise up against a third entity that is almost not human, right? We've seen this process of almost creating a culture of hate over the years, and all of this with the support of the international community at worst, and at best, with an apologetic attitude from the international community by saying, but that's part of the folklore, They need to say it. They need to say that they're against the occupation to be able to do anything. But when you have one generation after another and after another, and you teach them this hate in kindergarten, and then in elementary school, and then at the university, and then when they leave the university, if they join, political world, or if they join the civil society in the Palestinian society, this is all they get. Their national identity evolves around hating Israel. And even if they don't, because we're not in war against all Arabs, God forbid, or all Palestinians, but even if they're not allowed to say it in a public sphere. So there's sort of a collective bullying. And we've been showing for 20 years now, because our president, Professor Gerald Steinberg, created NGO Monitor 20 years ago exactly. We've been fighting against this systematically. How? By following the money. We don't want to fight them. We tried, trust me, we tried to debate them. We tried to say, come, let's have a round table. Let's discuss what is really human rights and humanitarian causes. But not once did any of these groups want to debate with us. So what we did, we said, we'll follow the money and we'll hurt them and send the message the only way that they will understand. So we've been going to the governments and saying, your money that was earmarked to build sustainable development, to build democracy one day in the Palestinian society, and one day enable them to maybe stand on their own feet, right, and have their own state. And I'm not going into politics. It's too big on me to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But instead of going to that, it is going to incitement against Israelis, to blatant anti-Semitism. And I was in the parliament in Berlin the third week of September. So this is like 10 days before October the 7th. And I said to them, words lead to actions. If you repeat them often enough, and if enough people repeat them, they become a reality. I went back to the German parliament 3 weeks ago, and I spoke with the same members of the parliament, and they looked at me with frozen looks, and they said, it is insane. There was no way we could have known. And as chilling as it is, October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. As the Secretary General of the UN said, I agree with him, but he meant a different thing. When he said the Hamas massacre didn't happen in a vacuum, he meant that it happened in the context of the Israeli occupation. I say, no, it happened in the context of a culture of hate that we all have allowed to be created over the years. So up until October the 7th, I split also our work until October the 7th and afterwards, because I know that we're short on time, and Susan, no, I can do this forever. um, our work directly led to, first and foremost, over $120 million in cuts in funding to anti-Israeli NGOs. We would take our reports to the European Parliament, to the German Parliament, to the US Congress, and we would show the elected officials that where the money is going. And then we would also help them draft policies to make it better. Now, when I say $120 million, that is a conservative estimate. Why? Because all of this there's no transparency. There's very little transparency, I should say. It's very difficult to really know how much money and exactly to whom it goes. And in the US, you can work with the congressional offices, and they will get a better answer when they send a question to you, the USAID, which is the US governmental aid agency. But when you go to Europe, most of the governments, in Germany, you have to pay money to get an information of where the taxpayers' money is invested. That's how insane it is. But that is not even our biggest impact. Why? Because I can go and cut the funding now, but unless I address the root cause of the problem, the system will eventually go back to doing the same thing. So today they will say, okay, we're not going to fund this organization, but tomorrow they will have no tools in place to avoid making a similar mistake with another organization. So a much bigger impact over the years that we have had was helping with our research over 15 governments to change their NGO funding policies. What does that really mean? Because I use all these fancy words because I'm so used to the political world. It means, in certain cases, legislation. So a few years ago, we passed the first of its kind in Europe legislation in Switzerland that says, seemingly a simple thing, Switzerland will not fund NGOs that promote hatred, anti-Semitism, or have ties to terror. You would think this is common sense, but there was no such legislation. In certain cases, this means introducing additional requirements in the contracts between governments and NGOs, so that they have a contractual obligation towards the government, right? In certain cases, it's demanding that the funds are retracted from them. In certain cases, it means helping the Israeli government to understand that PFLP, a designated terrorist organization, has a network of 13 Palestinian NGOs that has been using taxpayers' money from Europe to promote terrorist organizations' narratives, and then they designated them. Most of the designation was actually based on open source information, and we were the first to flag this. But after October the 7th, none of this is enough. Because all of this is a change here, a change there. It's addressing the symptoms and not the root cause. We understood immediately that unless there is a serious, fundamental recalibration of how governments provide aid to the Palestinians, and unless there is a serious, fundamental de-radicalization of the Palestinian society across the board, this includes NGOs and all the human rights and humanitarian projects. This includes textbooks and UNRWA and what the teachers do and how you hire teachers and how you fire them if they teach hateful content. And this includes all UN agencies, because UNRWA is the best known, but it is only one of the 23 UN agencies operating in Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. UN provides every 3 years, because they have strategic programs for 3 years, right? It provides $1.2 billion to the Palestinian Authority. The European Union also, in their joint strategy for Palestine, as they call it, between 2021 and 2023, meaning 2 years effectively, earmarked 1.2 billion, 1.17 billion euros, which is more or less today $1.2 billion. So think about the numbers that are being funneled to support the Palestinian society. Most of it to do some type of human rights and humanitarian work. We want funding conditionality, and we want the European governments, first and foremost, and we did this. The EU, the European Union, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and Austria, a week after October the 7th, froze all their funding to the Palestinian Authority and launched internal investigations, excluding humanitarian aid to Gaza. That was the only thing that some of them kept flowing for obvious reasons. Now, in between, the European Union, Germany, and Sweden and Switzerland, completed their reviews. And thanks to the research that we sent to the European Union, they did two things. They cut funding to two projects, including Palestinian organizations, totaling $8 million over incitement against Israelis in the aftermath of October the 7th. Because we took all of them and we said, let's just do a report of what they've been tweeting and saying since October the 7th. And that was enough. We didn't have to offer any commentary. But they did another thing. The European Union said, moving forward, we're going to add another condition in all our contracts with the Palestinian organizations, and that is an anti-incitement clause or anti-incitement condition. What does that tell you? That tells you two things. It says, number one, they didn't have such a thing until now, so there was actually no way that they knew how to screen, and they were not screening against incitement. And number two, it means that whatever they found, it was so grave that they understood that they needed to put a new condition in the contracts in order to prevent that and cover their own, reputation. Sweden did a review, and then we worked with the Swedish parliament and we told them, look, your aid agency is not going to find any flaws because they're part of the problem. They love funding these guys. So the Swedish parliament said to me, okay, let's wait. The minute that they have the review, we're going to send it to you. You review it, and then you tell us what we should tell them. We reviewed it within 6 hours, including having it translated into Swedish. And 2 days later, the Swedish parliament went public in an official statement saying, with regret, we inform the Swedish aid agency that it has failed to comply and answer to the mandate we gave it, and we now send it back to extend the review, and we ask them to screen all social media of all the organizations the Swedish government funds and look specifically for incitement and for all those organizations who condemned the Hamas massacre of October the 7th. They're not going to find a single one, because what these organizations have been saying since October the 7th is there was no massacre. Shifa Hospital was only civilians and it was bombed by Israel. All this is happening. This is all propaganda created by Israel so that Israel can invade and occupy Gaza. And they have accused Israel of genocide and ethnic cleansing. This has been their campaign. So not only have they not accused or condemned Hamas, they have, well, if not glorified it, they had completely relativized it and went into, on the contrary, they attacked Israel. So this is only what we've done in the last couple of weeks. But this is the immediate results of the first internal reviews. We are now working specifically in Germany with the parliament in making sure that they will introduce conditions for the day after. The day after is not only a question of how Gaza will look. This is what all the politicians are talking about. The question is, how will the international community support Palestinians with the enormous funds that they have been providing? But rest assured, the day after, the money will triple or quadruple, because the international community will want to renew, will want to rebuild, will want to assist. All of these things on their own are not they're welcome, right? We don't wish for the civilian casualties, but unless this is done with conditions and sanctions in case you're caught red-handed, right? Inciting, promoting anti-Semitism, denying Israel's right to exist. The bar is that, this is the base, right? If before October the 7th we fought against anti-Semitism, now we go to governments and we say, no. If a player that calls themselves a human rights organization or a partner to your government does not recognize Israel's right to exist, they are not fit to be your partner. This is what we do. You will not hear much about this in the media. A lot of our work is done behind the scenes because in many cases we don't want the agencies, the aid agencies, to know that the material is coming from us. We want to empower the elected officials and we want to give it to them. And it's not difficult because again, it's all Google. So in theory, their offices should be able to do that. But the difference is that before October the 7th, you might not have heard about us, but you also might not have necessarily cared about all the things that are happening behind the closed doors and behind the scenes. But after October the 7th, we are all in this fighting to make sure that we have a brighter future. I'm fighting to make sure that my two kids, my two boys, who will have to go to the Israeli army, don't have to defend the rest of their citizens again in 50 years from now, in another October 7th. And the only way to do that is to sanction hate. It's that simple. And the fight is existential. We are fighting still for the right of Israel to exist. It's just that the battlefield is not like in Golda Meir's times, a physical one. Because yes, they took us by surprise and we paid the heaviest toll ever. But the minute we understood what happened, our soldiers were out there and we regained the sense of physical security here in Israel and we trust in our army. But the fight for Israel's right to exist and for its legitimacy is exactly in that human rights space that we've been fighting within. It's in the parliaments, it's for the legitimacy, it's on universities, amongst academics and people who educate our youth and young people of what is just and what is right. And that's where we are. I'm going to stop here and allow for questions or comments. And I again thank you very much for taking the time to hear me speak. And look forward to potentially next time doing this in person in in Dallas.
And thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, be sure and write your questions in chat. I have also added the NGO Monitor's website in chat so that you'll have that information. One of the questions that we have so far is someone who was South African said that how can Israel be called an apartheid state? Please comment on the fact that there are Arabs in the Knesset, Arabs head of departments in hospitals, Arab teachers teaching Israeli children, etc.
It's an excellent question. Obviously, most of the BDS campaign, right, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and most of the demonization of Israel has nothing to do with facts. What they have done, they have taken big words that resonate with, particularly with younger people and with what we would call progressive circles today, which is justice, freedom, right to defending the minorities, defending the underprivileged, and they have attached the Palestinian cause to that. I mean, to call Hamas freedom fighters, as BBC has done, right? I mean, there's no logical explanation to that. The apartheid libel actually started many years ago with Zionism is racism. This was first promoted by the Arab states and the Arab League. and then revamped in the context of the international human rights community at the UN conference in Durban, South Africa in 2001. This was the first time that Zionism is racism left the sort of Arab League and was normalized and became a campaign, right, or a slogan amongst the giants of human rights. In parallel to the official conference, there was an NGO summit, a human rights non-governmental organization summit, where Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Oxfam, one of the biggest Christian organizations doing human rights and humanitarian work, they all starred there. And they signed a resolution that says Zionism is racism. And they did that in South Africa. Today, we regard that conference the beginning of what we understand as the BDS campaign today. Now, BDS movement is not a centralized movement, right? But they all rally behind that one line, which is Zionism is racism. Israel is oppressing the indigenous, underprivileged, people, if you will. They also play on this completely flawed notion that Jews are white and come from Europe and thus privileged, right? And they moved to Israel to oppress the people of color, for lack of a better word, right? Because this is how it plays. It's the intersectional philosophy, right? Which obviously is so far away from reality, because anyone who has visited Israel understands that Israel, out of its 9 million people, has 2 million Israeli Arabs. And amongst the Jews, there's Jews coming from every part of the world, and including the Arab world. And if you would put a Palestinian person next to any one of them, you would not be able to tell a difference in the street. I mean, because Judaism is a religion before anything, right? But why has this succeeded so well? Because first of all, unfortunately, people don't know facts. And most of the younger people don't even know what apartheid is, or they wouldn't know the history of South Africa and what happened there, right? But all they need to hear is, I'm fighting for justice. I'm fighting to liberate. I mean, there were so many videos. I know it is so far away from what we do, because what we do is always sourced, and it's almost academic, right? Because we need everything to be documented and so on. But there were so many videos since October the 7th where they would approach a BDS activist and they would ask them, do you know which river and which sea? And they would not know, right? They would be chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. And they're clueless. Like they don't know the basic geography. And now that explains how unintelligent it is, but it does not say how dangerous it is. Because as simple as that message is, it plays into an extremely powerful emotional place with people, where young people today want to feel activists, and that's and they have managed to combine this somehow with the occupation, fighting the occupation. But when they talk about it, they elegantly also, they go between, well, the occupation, the 67 lines, but then in the next three sentences they forget the 67 lines and they talk about Negev. And there was a month ago a senior editor who worked for over 10 years at the Human Rights Watch, and she left the organization exactly because of the toxic anti-Semitic culture. And I spoke to her, and she said to me, we had a discussion when Human Rights Watch did its big report accusing Israel of apartheid. And I told them, you know that no one's going to read over 100 pages, right? So if you wrote another nuance at page 67, right, that's no one's gonna read that. People are gonna read the executive summary, and they're gonna repeat. The only thing that's gonna stay out there is that Human Rights Watch said that Israel is apartheid. And Omar Shakir and their leadership said, we don't care. We just don't care because we want to campaign against Israel and against the occupation. And that's the best explanation I have. It's old, good anti-Semitism.
The other next question we have is, how have the Palestinians been so effective in winning the media war?
Because, first of all, we don't play by the same rules. You know, it has taken Israel over a month to count its casualties. And we are still counting because you don't state, and we still have many that are classified as missing because the bodies were not found and identified. Yet, when there's an explosion at the Shifa hospital in Gaza, it takes them about 15 minutes for the Ministry of Health in Gaza to say that it was 500 people and to give a full count of how many women, how many children, and now between the fact that the Gaza Ministry of Health is Hamas Ministry of Health, so how reliable is that to begin with, and the fact that no serious person should trust anyone who can, within 15 minutes of a blast, count 500 dead. I mean, it's just, but they don't care. And they've been doing this for years. They send it around, everything from images to numbers, to empty accusations. And by the time that we on our side take the time to counter it, the emotion that the image was supposed to create already went around the world. There were so many examples in the past where they would show an image of a child and then they would say killed by Israeli army, and then a few days later the Israelis would show that it's a photo of a kid from Aleppo in Syria and that it was fabricated, but no one cared because people already had that image. And the part of the problem is that the media is playing into that, right? I mean, no one questions. I can tell you that when the IDF released what they call as the uncensored video of the footages of what happened on October the 7th, there were certain media houses that refused to see it, saying it is IDF propaganda. Now, that is IDF propaganda, most of it filmed by Hamas and shared on their Telegram accounts and so on. But when it's numbers released by Hamas, that is to be seen as a legit. So we are never going to win a war of numbers because life matters in Israel. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars to operate the Iron Dome, to intersect rockets and to protect our civilians. We spend billions of dollars bombing Gaza before we let our soldiers march in physically because we want to prevent the casualties. Hamas, instead of building one shelter, took all the money that they had to build tunnels where they hide, not the civilians, to build rockets and to get rich, because their leadership sits in Qatar and has very very fat bank accounts.
Another question is that it is, whoops, wait just a second. Oh, I lost myself there. Be back in a minute. Oh. That it's very, your job has to be very stressful. Of looking at all these lies and everything every single day. What do you do to stay motivated, to stay positive?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I chose to move to Israel in order to live in a Jewish state. And I wanted my kids to be proud Israelis, and I wanted them to live in a community where they're the majority and not the minority. And when I see the hate around the world, I'm reminded of why I do this. And when I see the hate that was unleashed around the world after October the 7th, I'm reminded that it's not only about us here in Israel, and that it's not only about us here in the Jewish community. I really genuinely believe that I'm contributing tiny little bit to defending democratic values. And I come from a country that I was not born and did not grow up in a democracy. I had to learn what living in Western democratic society means. And the part about the rights is the easy part. The part about your duties and obligations in a democratic society is the part that is difficult to teach. And that is the part that the international community needs to teach the Palestinian people. And I want to believe that when I fight anti-Semitism, I'm contributing to moving that entire process a tiny little forward. Because if there's going to be any chance of coexistence, because peace is such a big word, right? Coexistence here, and a better future for me and for my kids here, but also for all the Jews around the world. Because when we are hit here, it's the Jewish community around the world that is actually attacked physically.
Mhm.
So I draw strength from believing, and it might be my personal thing, but I genuinely believe that when I wake up in the morning, I fight for a cause, and that I make a world with my team a tiny little better, and I bring a tiny little more light into it. Now, we're only one organization. There's so many groups doing incredible work, and we work with all of them together. And I believe that if we all continue fighting, we will prevail, because sanity and light and a will to have a good life and to live peacefully has to prevail over dictatorships and totalitarian regimes that first and foremost keep their people hostages and bring them and keep them in the darkness, but then want to spread that darkness to the rest of the world. Sorry,
And
it's 9 p.m.
and there is life right there. on that note of hope and
I have a station.
beautifulness, we will end. Thank you so much for joining us. And you have to repeat everything because I started the recording late. Thank
We'll do
all
this.
of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank all of you for attending. In chat is NGO Monitor's website. Please go to it and see what they do. And we also, there is another program we're partnering with Nishmat Amam Sunday night at about anti-Semitism after October the 7th. So it's on our website. You can find out information there or email me at susan@swjc.org. Thank you all very, very much. And Am Israel Chai. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Am Israel Chai.
Bye-bye.